here today to answer some of the most frequently asked questions that I get about EMDR intensives because, intensives are not the traditional way of doing therapy, and there is a lot to know. First of all, what is an EMDR intensive? What does that even mean? Simply, an EMDR intensive is working for a longer amount of time to accelerate the therapy process, to accelerate the healing and relief. So in traditional weekly therapy, you come in for a 45, 50-minute session, and then you're done, and then you pick up next week where you left off. In an intensive, you're going to have a longer session and sometimes multiple times per week. So the most common format in my practice is a 2 or 3 hour session, 2 or 3 times a week. I do have a range. I do have some clients who have done a 90-minute intensive multiple times a week, and I have had clients who have done a 3-hour intensive once a week. And I've recently been exploring the option of doing a 4-hour intensive, but I haven't tried it yet. I think I did once do a 2.5 hour, actually, now that I'm thinking of it. One question that comes up when people hear that is, first of all, how am I going to make time for that? And second of all, how am I going to sit for that? To answer the first question, how am I going to make time for that? So some of my clients are children and teens, and some of my clients are adults. So obviously the responsibilities that you're kind of leaving behind to make space for this or putting aside to make space for this are going to be very different. I will say that when it comes to doing an intensive, a lot of times what I see is that things have come to a point where the thing that the client wants to work on has become pressing to the point where they need to put other things aside and make this a priority. Kind of like if you think about if you're driving along, going about your day, and then your tire pops, you have to stop everything and go change that tire, right? Because that kind of just takes precedence for that day. Because you can't do the other things that you want to do without getting that tire changed. It's quite frankly just so in the way. That's how I think about intensives. For many of the people who come to me, it has come to a point where they feel it's really important to work on this thing and put it ahead of other things in this moment. Sometimes that's because it's interfering with their work. So they're anyways coming late, leaving early. Maybe they quit their job. Maybe they're not working for this year because of the problems that they're experiencing. Whether it's extreme difficulty sleeping, very high anxiety, panic attacks, flashbacks, a lot of avoidance and anxiety. When it comes to kids, I see a lot of kids with school refusal. So they're skipping a lot of school, coming late, leaving early, having issues at school. The children who I see, the schools are 100% on board and we make a plan and they understand what's going on. It's not behind their back or anything. They understand the need for it. And it's a very collaborative process. I speak to the therapists and in some cases I speak to the school depending on the situation. That's kind of where things stand in terms of making the space and the time for it. Sometimes people will try to schedule in advance with me to work around specifics. For example, legal holidays. A lot of people have off from school or work, and I tend to be in the office on those days. So we can do that. Sometimes people will plan for their winter break, spring break, summer break is a very common one. The summers tend to get booked up in advance for kids and especially teens or people who are going to college, and they kind of want to get that work done in the summer. So that's commonly gets booked up towards the spring. Some people will come in and do that work in a very condensed period of time. Sometimes people will come here for one of the holidays. For example, in the Jewish community, we have Pesach and Sukkot, Passover and Sukkot. People will often come here from other countries, in Israel and Europe and Canada. And sometimes people will tell me that they want to coordinate it with that. So they're coming in anyways. Can we book it before or after the holiday? Which I try my best to help people work through. Sometimes people travel in from farther away, even 2 hours away, and it's not feasible to do that multiple times a week for a few weeks. So sometimes we'll work with people staying over locally here and getting things done over the course of a few days. Another question I get asked a lot is how much time do I need? So that's obviously something that is very, very personal and unique to each situation. Some people are going to need more time. Some people are going to need less time. One factor is how much time are you able to commit to this? How much money are you able to spend on this? And also in terms of your tolerance level for like how much you feel that you can invest emotionally. Some people feel like, I could put in 1 3-hour session into this and whatever I get in, I do. The most common presentation I see where people feel like I just need to be done with this. I want to work through this as much as I can and get this done. In that case, I suggest to people what I call a foundational intensive. A foundational intensive is a 15-hour intensive. Clients will come in for an intake. In case of children, the parents will come in for the intake. And then we'll start with the intensive session. So let's say the client is coming in for 3-hour intensives. So they start coming in for those 3-hour intensive sessions, and we'll do 5 of them. So maybe the first week they come in for 2, the next week they come in for 1, maybe 1 week they come in for 3. We kind of see how we split it up, and they come in for a total of 15 hours. And when I work with children and teens, we'll do parent sessions interspersed in there. So 30-minute virtual sessions to follow up. I'll give them some guidance and homework to do to help move things along at home, kind of some do's and don'ts, some pieces of insight that might be able to help them help their child. And then I do a follow-up session at the end, 2 to 3, 4 weeks later, depending on what the goals are, where we follow up and I re-administer all the assessments and we discuss progress and where do we go from here. Another question I get asked a lot is why I require clients to have their own weekly therapist. Most of my intensives are adjunctive, meaning clients are going to weekly therapy already with their established therapist, and they're coming to me to add on to that work. I didn't always work like this, but what I found was that clients who had that existing support did a lot better and got a lot more out of their intensives. This is really true with teens and adults. When you've already been in therapy, you're familiar with therapy and the expectations, and you have developed some of those skills necessary to open up and be vulnerable, to share about yourself, to be honest and communicate, hey, this isn't working, or why do you say that thing? Or I would prefer X. I didn't like Y, I have something I want to talk about, but I'm having a hard time X, Y, and Z. Those skills are really important to be able to do an intensive and to be able to have that relationship already and know what it's like to have a therapeutic relationship with someone. And very often what intensive work does is it opens up the door to further healing in certain areas. And when clients have a therapist that they already see, they can easily transition back into the weekly therapy session and continue healing and continue this work in these areas with that weekly therapist. And when you have done an intensive but don't have a therapist already, it's very hard to then go and establish a relationship and give all that background and start from there. Another reason is because intensives are very intense and things come up for clients and it gets deep and it gets heavy and it gets difficult sometimes. And it's very, very helpful for clients to already have a supportive therapist who they have a trusting and safe relationship with, who they can then go to during the intensive. During that week, they can continue their therapy or they can pause their therapy and can go to the therapist afterwards, and they can discuss what's going on for them, what's coming up for them, and discuss what they want to do with it and further work that they can do. So it's very helpful to already have that person in place, and it's difficult to establish that relationship after and go from there. So I do ask that clients either have a therapist that they have already been going to, or the other option I sometimes do is if someone has a therapist that they saw in the past and had a good relationship with, that they check in with them and say, hey, I'm going to do this intensive and she does require me to have a therapist. So I just wanted to know if I do feel like I need further support, would I be able to come to you? Do you have availability? Would you be open to this arrangement? Which often works well. Sometimes people will come to me with a brand new issue. So they didn't have a therapist before because there was just this car accident. Their child was just in this fire. There was a medical trauma that's just happening now or just happened, and there are no other supports in place. So in those cases, I say, let's first do the research to find a therapist who you would be comfortable seeing afterwards. Have that consultation call and discuss the situation, have a consultation session with them, have your child meet them, make sure it's someone that you would feel comfortable with. And even if your child only ends up seeing them a couple times, or if they don't even end up seeing them, but at least you know you have that person kind of in your pocket as a further support. And it's so much easier when you get that out of the way ahead of time. But for the majority of my clients, they do have an established therapist. Most of the referrals I receive are from therapists referring their clients to me to do this work. So that brings me to another question that comes up. If someone's already in therapy, why would they come to you and do an intensive? So that's a really good question. So one reason that someone would come to an intensive at an adjunctive therapy is because they're already in therapy and they're stuck. So maybe there's a goal that they've been working on and they haven't been able to achieve it. Or maybe there's this traumatic event, this experience that they've had that either it hasn't come up, they haven't been able to even speak about it to their own therapist, or it has come up, but they haven't been able to really get into it. Or their therapist is not trained in trauma work and doesn't feel comfortable getting into that, doesn't have the tools to really help with the trauma healing. So they refer them to do an intensive and say, hey, go do this work and then come back and we'll continue on the other layers. Because oftentimes there's a lot of aftermath in the traumatic work. So for example, someone's having a really hard time in their relationship with their family, and their goal is to increase their communication skills and improve on things, but they realize that they're getting stuck because there was this huge rift that happened years ago and they never addressed it. So they come to me and they work through this conflict that happened, and we work through the layers of that and the emotions they felt and what it brought up for them. And then they can go back to their therapist and work on kind of the aftermath. Like, what do I do now? How do I navigate this relationship with this person? Or, for example, a child who comes to me because they have a fear that's coming up around going on the bus, and they can no longer go on the school bus. Their mother's driving them every day, and there's a lot of separation anxiety and fear. So they come to me and we kind of work through this issue that's been stuck, and we figure out, oh, this thing had happened that triggered this, and we work through that. And we work on some tools and coping skills and some strategies for the future and building for success. And then they go back to their therapist who they've been working with, and they're able to continue and work on the aftermath of that. So what does that look like now? Okay, you did this work. You're doing so much better. What does that look like going to school every day and being able to build on that, being able to navigate anxiety in other situations? And of course, there are times where something is truly an isolated issue and someone comes in and they have just this one thing to work on and they're done and we're good and that's it. But so often there are so many other layers. One question that people ask is, how am I going to sit for that amount of time? I mean, it sounds crazy long to sit for 2 to 3 hours at a time, especially multiple times per week. So the answer to that is that I do my best to mix in EMDR with other modalities. So I'm doing expressive arts therapy, we're doing play therapy, sand tray therapy, we're doing in music and movement. And there's a lot of things that are going on and we're moving around the room. And I really do find that the time does fly. I check in with the clients at the end of the session, and I would say 90% of the time we're shocked that the time is over and constantly wishing that we had more time to do more. With kids, people tend to be more nervous about kids. How's my kid going to sit for that long? But I kind of try to make it like therapy camp for kids and for adults, honestly. And we're doing so much of that other work. We're making sanctuaries and we're making art, and we have a scrapbook that we're doing as we go through, and we're putting in all the wins into the scrapbook, and we're drawing out the coping skills, and we're imagining the future, and we have music playing. And I can't say that doing trauma work is fun, but I try my best to make it engaging. And at times we do have fun. And with whether I'm working with a kid or a teen or a young adult or an adult, we're constantly laughing and joking around and playing games and kind of having in all those elements to make it as enjoyable as possible. Of course, it's deep and it gets heavy, but I do my best to try to balance it out so that it's tolerable. I will say, though, that you know yourself, and it's important to trust yourself. And if you know that you're the person who, no matter what is going on, will not be able to sit for longer than 90 minutes, then we're going to honor that. And I will say, don't. Let's not plan for that then. Let's try to maybe we're going to do a few 90-minute sessions a week. Maybe we're going to try to just do 90 minutes once a week. I mean, every intensive is individualized for each person. And we're going to work with that and work in a way that works for you. Another question that I get is, why is this something that you offer? Like, how did you get into this? To answer that question, I used to do the kind of traditional weekly therapy where all my clients came week to week and everyone was in a set spot or slot. And what I found was that when I was doing EMDR, the more that I shifted my work and was specializing more and more in trauma and acute anxiety work with EMDR, what I found was clients were experiencing a lot of symptoms, and they were having flashbacks and difficulty sleeping and avoidance and all of these things that were getting in the way of their life, and things were feeling really heavy and difficult. And it was really hard to stop the session and say, okay, come back next week. And there was a lot of difficulty and suffering in the week in between. I found myself saying, I wish that we could have a longer amount of time. And we would end the session and I would think to myself, what would it be like if we had another 90 minutes right now? What would it be like if we had another hour? And I started exploring EMDR intensives. And this wasn't a new concept for me. When I trained in EMDR back in 2019, my trainer, Ricky Greenwald, mentioned EMDR intensives. And I believe he was the one who had pioneered that. And when you hear something and you kind of bookmark it for the future and you say to yourself, that's going to be my thing. Well, that was what I did. When I heard about intensives, I bookmarked it in my EMDR basic training. And I said to myself, I think I'm going to be into that one day. And sure enough, years later, after I became certified and really felt like I knew my way around EMDR and had enough flexibility to be able to do it for a longer amount of time, I said to myself, oh, I think it's time to revisit this. Let me look into that EMDR intensive thing. And so I did some advanced trainings to learn how to do intensives and learn how to build them into my business. And so that's where I am today. What I hope for the future is to start offering group intensive, which is something I'm really excited about. And I hope to integrate drumming circles and expressive art. And there's just so much possibility. Peter Levine says, trauma is a fact of life, but it does not have to be a life sentence. And that is something that I absolutely live by as a therapist, because unfortunately, by virtue of being alive, we're going to encounter trauma, but it does not have to define us. It does not have to define our lives. And by doing intensives, I am able to help people get to the other side faster.